Hey Ali, good to see you. Gia, good to see you as always. So wonderful to see familiar faces. And we've started on time, which is nice. Just waiting for Ekta to show up. And then I'll do a quick review and introduction. While we're here, let me start. So, Assalamu alaikum to my fantastic Cube Edutour community, friends, family, supporters from all over the world. This is live chat session number 17. We've had some incredible times, incredible conversations, and we're going to have another one today with a very, very special guest who has just arrived. And this is part of the Jugalbandi Series, revolving around the conversation between Jean Gardner and myself. And here is Ekta, who is our sweet, friendly guest for today, who I'm going to bring on board right now. Ekta, where are you? It's funny, I was just reading up on library.
Hello,
Hey,
sir.
hi,
How are you?
good. How are you doing?
Get the volume right. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. I can see you. I'm a happy man. Let me just get my camera to behave itself and get you to see me. Can you see me?
Yeah.
Oh no.
Should I wait? I'll get the fan also.
Wait, where did you go? What happened? You
No,
tell
I
me.
just got the fan.
Forgot the
Okay,
fan.
we're good.
So I'm going to do a very quick introduction. I've just done my salams, and I'm going to give you something to think about while I do your introduction. Remember this book?
Yeah.
Where's the copy? Yes! Now we're talking. This
Yeah.
this is synergy. This is synergy.
Yeah.
And talking about ESP. So I'm gonna listen. I'm just gonna do a very light introduction to you, but I'd like you to do your own introduction. So, friends, we have, as usual, people watching from all over the world and contributing and participating, which is amazing. Thank you for that support. It's fantastic. Um, Ekta was a student of mine a couple of years ago, and she did a course called Semiotics of Culture and Architecture, which was a whole semester long course that we did together. I believe that Ekta is a member of our future leaders. She is a powerhouse of a brain, a great thinker. And I don't mean to put pressure on you, Ekta. I'm going to try. This is the idea is to take the pressure off of you, because now people are just like, okay, she's the coolest kid out there. Talk to her, Zen, shut up. You know, they're like fed up of hearing. Ekta is 19, and I just thought that it's important for us to bring on board somebody from the current generation and the future, so that while we're discussing pedagogical structures, reframing things, rethinking a new narrative, post-pandemic, etc., I thought, before we become obsolete in terms of our thoughts and our ability to use the language of the internet, I thought let's bring on somebody who is going to take this into the future. So, Ekta, if you could introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about the course. There's people here who don't know anything about what we did or how you and I know each other. So,
Okay.
just 2 minutes to do that, and then that'll warm us up, and I can throw out a few questions, and we'll have a conversation stress-free. Just relax.
Got it. So I am 19 years old. I just got done with the A-levels program, and I met Sir Zain through this semiotics course that he spoke about that we did. I didn't know that I was interested in anything related to liberal arts, quote unquote, till I took the course, until I think I had my first conversation with Sir Zain on the bus when we were going to the Makli necropolis. So I think that's when I realized that this is something that I want to look into beyond conversation. I think that's when the words heritage and positioning, I think, really meant something for me beyond their dictionary definition. I linked it to history, I linked it to architecture, and I linked it to anthropology, which is something I plan on studying as a major in uni when it does start this year or next year or whenever things get better. So yeah, that's me. I read a lot these days. I'm getting into like these days I'm really exploring what it means to just have like what it means to explore one's identity. I think that's a conversation that also started with Sir Zen, and I'm just developing on that. I think it's so vast and it needs so much exploration that one can't just at any point in time be like, ab maine figure out kar liya that this is what I am as a person, because it's so transient that you have to keep on working on it. So that's what I'm doing these days.
And you've just managed to throw out these heavy, like 5, 6, 7, I'm counting in my mind, that, oh my God, all these things, these words that we find. So I'm going to come back to you, and don't think you're going to be let off the hook. So listen, we talked about this, Ekta, and I haven't spoken to you in ages, but I know you've been watching these chats and you've been following the work that Edutours been doing. And basically that semester that we spent together was 4 locations. It was a course that was based around the Edutours. So we had a briefing before we went. Then you did the pop-up classroom at the location. We did the drawings, we did the maths, and then you guys came back and did these presentations for me. So looking back, what do you think was the biggest takeaway for you from that experience? Like what really like made you think, okay, this was worth doing for this reason, in terms of just how did it impact you personally in terms of your thought process?
Right. So I think it was a lot of things. Like for me, it worked out in an extremely like life-changing kind of a way, pivotal, because there were a lot of things that were happening at that point in time. So I think we start with the course. And before the course, I had already like done these like summer program-ish type courses with like National Geographic and stuff. So I kind of understood what it meant to be in a globalized environment with people from different nationalities and different spaces like around the world. I think taking the course was my way of reflecting back on that time, because I understood that the only way I can take what is being said to me from an outsider's perspective is when I know where I stand as a person. So for me, the course became a source of figuring out who I was, only to then know who I was in relation to what was being said. So, what I think the changing point, if we figure out like one specific point, was when I realized that a lot of stuff that was said to me like on these programs that I did with Americans and with like mostly Americans actually, there was subtle racism which I never could figure out, I think, because it was my own need to like satisfy also, I feel like. And I remember we were sitting in the shed in a lyceum when you mentioned the fact that we praised our colonizers to such an extent, be it soft power, be it the British that really came in with their military and did it. We put them on such a pedestal. And I think that was the conversation where you broke it down for us, where we spoke about this book, where I realized that like I've been looking at it with a different perspective my whole life. Like Urdu has been a problematic language our entire lives. We've never worked on it. We've never worked on Abhi we were talking in English, So like it was like the realization, it came like a flood, and I was like, I have been ashamed of who I was as a person this entire time. And I think that realization really led me to go out and be like, nahi, is tarah nahi chal sakta, because I need an identity for myself. And then I think I'm going to elaborate a little more than the question that you asked. But then I think I looked at a national identity that I wanted, right? I needed something to rely on. And I couldn't find one in this country, in Pakistan to be specific. And we had a few more conversations where I remember you told me that you don't rely on the 70 years of history that we have as a country, because that is just 70 years. That is nothing. And you said you have to go way back. And I remember jab hum log Makli gaye the, we stood at that one point where you said here is 4,000 years of like architecture and history, and I was like, we have everything right here, and we don't need to rely on things that are external and tertiary. So I think that was really something that changed my perspective. And the course gets like 100% of the, you get 100, the ZM experience gets 100% credit for doing that, I think.
So
Yeah.
I don't think that's what anybody wants to hear. So, the English is an interesting language. So I think, Ekta, I thought about this also for these chats. So do we do this in Urdu? Do we do it in English? And, unfortunately or fortunately, you and I are speaking to a global public. There's people here who are signing up
Right.
from all over the world. And I think it would be unfair to not share these thoughts in a language that is common to everyone. So without critiquing the depth or the value or the structure of English as a language, if it can be used just for this
As a
functionality,
global conversation.
yeah, it's just, if you think about it as the 100 characters you're allowed to use on Twitter and just leave it at that and not really give it any more
Yeah.
importance, then it's fine, right? It's just functional. We're just walking through these things. But the identity question is really what I want to know, what pick your brain about in terms of. So we looked at four really phenomenal heritage sites, and we discussed identity. So now when you look back at that, and I wanted to find a way of connecting our 5,000, 6,000-year-old heritage from Mohenjo-daro down to, 200-year-old
Talpur.
tombs, and then Makli in between, which was 400 years, well, 400 years of history, but 700 years old from today. So what in your mind is identity? I'm going to frame that, keeping in mind that, like, this whole language issue, right? We're talking about a global audience. We're talking about a digital age. There's a lot of blurring. You use this word transient. So there's a lot of gray areas happening everywhere because
Right.
the boundaries are blurring, right? If you were sitting today in Rio or Sao Paulo, we could have had this conversation. And there are people here from Australia and X and YZ. So, there is a sandwiching, like Jean and I spoke, and collapse of time and space. So, what today do you think, looking back, how would you define the term identity for yourself?
Okay, so for myself, I feel like so I'll refer to this previous chat that you had with Marvi Mazhar, and you guys spoke about how history had these fractures, right? And for me, I think and then I linked that to the conversation we had with when Zulfikar Ali Bhutto Jr. came, and he spoke about history being broken and
Yeah,
being from a singular perspective. So identity, I think I link it to two things, हेरिटेज एंड हिस्ट्री. अब हेरिटेज कम के नीचे भी सब पॉइंट्स आते हैं, लाइक it has to be, I think the biggest like title of heritage for me is environment, because now everything that I've seen, like Ranikote, Makli, Mohenjo-daro, I think it's part of the environment now. We can't treat it as a building or a
right.
location. I think it's like it's the community, the entirety of what we've seen is an environment and a sub like city or whatever, like on its own, right? So I think for identity, I feel like one needs to go back. Identity is very individual. Ek to, your gender, for example, is your identity. Those are very general things, like your gender, what you study, what you're passionate about. These are your general identities. But I think largely, if you look at history, then one has to choose their own, because wo jo fractures hai na, those are the main bits that were missing. So you
Yes,
have to choose, do you want to take into consideration queer history that was not included? Do you want to take into consideration a woman's perspective that was completely removed? So I think for me, then identity becomes this like cake, plain cake, that I decide कि इसकी मुझे ये frosting चाहिए, this is what I want on top of it, this is what I resonate with the most. But if I look at people, I feel like this conversation of identity also that we're having right now, it's, I think we have the privilege to have this conversation,
yes,
If
yes,
we look at most people, they don't go beyond just looking at it as a simple like dictionary word. you know. So really going into the depth of it, I think privilege and identity then go in a circular motion, because the more you figure out who you are, the more you understand the privilege that you have, and then that privilege reiterates you as a person. So I think I just, my realization of my privilege has been part of figuring out who I am. I think my realization of the opportunities that I've had has played a huge role. And then me making use of it, I think, has been my way of knowing who I am as a person. Learning and unlearning has played a huge role in me knowing what my identity is. Breaking down the conditioning that was done my entire life by either your school or your parents or anybody, and then really understanding that this is what I think from my own critical thinking, and this is what my conditioning was, you know. I don't need to believe in something just because I've been taught to believe in it. No matter what it is, you know. Even if somebody's like, "Acha, ye black hai," like I want to know why. So I think the question of why has been a huge part of me exploring my identity. Yeah.
Do you think that having a really solid knowledge of one's own cultural history is a privilege or a right that we should all have access to?
I think it is a right that we should all have access to, simply by virtue of the fact that there needs to be some grounding factor, you know. When I spoke about wanting a national identity, this is
Mm.
exactly what my problem was, because being a Punjabi, like my dad's Punjabi, my mom's Urdu speaking, and I mean, both of these sections aren't that, at least in my family, they're not that big on like, this is your ethnic identity, right? Like Sindhis are, like Balochis are, like Pakhtuns are, right? So for me, wanting something to cement myself on is important, but then having the ability to undo that and having the critical thinking and the exposure to figure out, okay, this is what I want to choose to pick out from this, and this is what I want to choose to leave. I think this is also important at the same time. I mean, having knowledge of your ethnicity, of your religion, I mean, I think it's just, it gives you a base, really, which everybody deserves to have, and then you need to go out and like shoot and like see what you choose to follow and what you choose to pick out from that.
Remember, I mean, I think that's brilliant. It's giving me more things to come back to you with. So, Ekta, if we look at when we were at Mohenjo-daro, right? So there's the entire river Indus,
Right.
and there was a time when there were 100 Indus Valley civilizations dotted all the way on either side of the spine. Today, there's 4 provinces, two that share the southern side, two that share the northern end of it, the top half, and then there's Gilgit-Baltistan. So, do
Yeah.
you not think that they all have a shared history because of the river, a shared
I
identity?
think I think I mean, if we even like, if we zoom further out, I think as the subcontinent, like we have a shared history because of things like, you know, unifying factors जो उस ज़माने में होते थे, like river, and everybody used to live around that. And um, we do, I agree with you, we do, but then it comes down to how much are we willing to look at it in that perspective, you know. Because इस तरह से तो one can also say that like हमारी जो 1947 की स्ट्रगल थी, दैट्स अ शेयर्ड हिस्ट्री दैट वी हैव, यू नो, अगर हमें सिर्फ इन लोगों को यूनाइट करना है जो पाकिस्तान में रहते हैं. बट देन हाउ मच आर यू विलिंग टू रियली, हाउ मच इज वन विलिंग टू really treat that like a shared history? All of this exists, the conversation that we're having, all of this exists, and so many people talk about it, but it comes down to the masses, right? Like how many people largely would look at it from the perspective of it being a shared history? That's what, where like I find it a little like shaky. Like I find myself in a position where I'm like, I'm talking about all of this, but I'm talking from my singular perspective and from the perspective of like मैं Sir Zain से बात करती हूँ, and you know, we all have our groups of social like people who resonate with what we're saying. But when I try to have these same conversations with even my friends, I don't think they relate to it in the manner which I do. And then I'm like, am I really, like, is this just a niche that's going to exist forever? Like, will I ever have an opportunity to talk about it in a group and have everybody resonate? Because I've not found that opportunity yet. I talk to a few friends and that's it. So I do agree that this is a shared history, but how do we make this a global or at least a national narrative is the bigger question for me.
So resonance. If you
Right.
have the idea of resonance, and if we can think about resonance as a kind of vibration, right? So you resonate with something, the energies line up, right? The vibration matches. And if that vibration, a sharing of an energy, like this dialogue, this conversation, something goes forward, something comes back. There is that oscillation. One idea goes this way, another idea comes back, then another idea. So that's a resonance. And I
Right.
think you've hit the nail on the head, because it is a little bit like, uh, speaking to the choir. We're all talking to each other. But the question is exactly what you pinpointed, is how do we get this? It's kind of a language, right, Ekta? I mean, you've just said that we should all have a right to our history, just like we have the right to water and air and gender rights as we have, and
And
animal.
we do, I'm sorry I'm cutting you, but we do have this shared history. Just the difference is that it's a very religious narrative that we have. So there's no replacement of that narrative with a, a historical, like, heritage based narrative. We do share a singular narrative, I think, just on the basis of religion. And so we know that, okay, so these people, these group of people that live in this country, they have the ability to share a singular narrative, right? So we know that they have that skill. It's just that, do we give them the right narrative now? Because after the 70s, I think just the whole narrative was changed to such an extent that damage अब इतना हो गया है, like 30 years down the road. It's been 30, 40 years, and we're still trying to undo that. And a small group is trying to undo an extremely large group. And I think we aren't able to strike the balance. And just the fact that I think it's Ahmad Shah Abdali, or it's one of these guys who came into Pakistan and like took over. I don't remember, but so there's Abdul Qadir, I think, or some fighter or some guy came. So I think we're just relying on Arabic history for it to be our history. We're now, जैसे अब हमारे प्राइम मिनिस्टर ने कहा है कि आप टर्किश ड्रामे देखें. So I told you how I read Fatma Bhutto's book, The New Kings of the World, and it spoke about exactly this. The fact that there is this rise of power in Turkey, in India, because of their Bollywood industry, which is now global, and in Korea, because of their K-pop. And I think all of this is happening, and हम फिर से जो है ना वही कि हमें हमारे ऊपर जो है ना कुछ like we should follow something. We're not original in our history also. So I think the narrative, जैसे अब उन्होंने कहा कि ये टर्किश ड्रामा देख लें, ऑटोमन एम्पायर से इंस्पिरेशन ले लें, मतलब ये वही बात हो गई ना, you're circling around. There's nothing original you're giving the audience. You're only giving
Why
them regurgitated history.
this is why we're having these dialogues? Is you've said all the right things. We need a new narrative. We need to get the word out beyond the niche market. We need to have everybody access this kind of heritage that you access through me, to everybody. So answer those questions then. How can we use this digital platform to create an innovative new narrative? The whole purpose of all of these conversations is to think about not more colonialism or more imperialism, but how can we generate a narrative that's from here, but using the digital age. So how do you suggest we do this?
Okay. So first I'll tell you what my pessimistic opinion is about this, then I'll go on to how we really can do it. Yeah. So I think that just the fact that we don't have the ability to think critically makes it all the more harder for us to be like, this is use this digital platform to further this and this idea, right? And I realized that when I hang out with people my age, I that's my social group, right? But it's so difficult. I feel like we give students way too much credit when we say ke ab ye log, you know, because you also spoke about how in one of your talks that how you're now using a phone, you're thinking of a phone from an educational perspective, because now you're using it to study, not just for the purpose of entertainment. But I know so many people, I mean everybody that I know, online classes are a joke. I mean, the way we treat them is a joke. I mean, people from good schools, I think I would say that I went to a good school. They were just, it's just, they're annoying. People just join lives and just do immature things. And I think we give them way too much credit when we say that they have the ability, or they give it enough priority to look into it from the perspective of कि you know अब मैंने education system या अब मैंने अपने लिए learning की definition change करनी है, you know. So that's one thing where I feel like the conversations that you've also had with Jean and stuff, I feel like you're talking about this, about wanting to bring this change, but it really has to start at a point where you tell students how important self-learning as a concept is. Because if that doesn't start, then how do you tell them कि अब अपना phone जो है, don't use it for Instagram, use it to watch a TED talk? I mean, how do you make that shift when they don't know what the importance of a TED talk or just a general reading a book or a video is? And even if you're using things like Instagram, I think there's an educated would be a wrong be the wrong vocabulary to use, but I think an easier a more polished way of using even Instagram. Just say you're on Instagram right now, people watching this are probably taking something away from it. So it's not sheer entertainment, it's conversation. So it's about following the right people, and you can't go to each and every student and be like कि इसको देखो ये करो. It has to come from within. It has to. So that's one thing where I feel like if you don't make a student realize the importance of self-learning and self-discipline, which is coming into question now, when Corona is a thing, and when the student is in their room, in their environment of comfort, and now you're telling them कि आप book खोलो और अब इस time पे आके पढ़ो. You don't have to wear a uniform, you know, psychologically you don't have to prepare yourself to go to school. You have to do it yourself. And now we're coming to realize that students, I mean, at least from the ones that I've seen, online teaching is easy. It's not that difficult. Given our curriculum, the A-level curriculum that we have, it's really easy. It's so textbook based. There's no conversation. Our teachers, I mean, I love our teachers, but like they don't, the way of learning is not critical. It's really just academical. So I think that has to change. And once that changes and a student has the responsibility from an early age to learn themselves, I think then we can talk about how you use the online platform as something that's educational. And I read this comment.
Yeah, this is an amazing comment that's coming from us. Online education, as it is currently, will not be effective globally. Of course, we know that because we're in a transition. So that's spot on, right? That identifies where we're at today, which is brilliant. EdTech requires real innovation, which is, I think, something we need to discuss. What is real innovation? In the form of intersectional design. This is amazing. And technology that's engaging, culturally relevant, and fast.
Right.
Now, that, Ekta, this is Mars, thank you. This is an amazing comment.
Yeah.
Where does my head go in the middle of all of this? Our buildings.
I think what he said is pretty much what this whole conversation has been, and come to this point. And I mean, you could talk about making an intersectional design and technology that's engaging, but two points, okay? Firstly, how quickly can you get it done, right? And secondly, 3 points actually. And secondly, how do you explain to a student that this is their new reality? Because most students aren't used to it. And thirdly, privilege. Will only the privileged have access to this? Is it going to be global in its approach? What do we do about student? I mean, अगर हम लोग पढ़ाई घर पे ला ही रहे हैं, for getting learning to our houses, I think it should be all like across the board, you know. I think it should be for my house help and her children, and it should be for me as well. So I think if we're looking at a design, there's so much we need to then like just these barriers of like these income barriers it needs to overcome. It needs to overcome the students ke general like apne dimag ke barriers of like change, being like this inertia that we have towards change. How do you tackle all of these social points when you do introduce, assuming that you introduce something along these lines? I think socially and culturally, to make it like systemic, it would have to really you would have to, it would take a few years, it would take a good amount of time, and really polished like policy makers and really polished individuals to carry this out.
So of course it'll take time, right? We've just entered this era.
Yeah,
It's going to
but
take.
it is time to reconsider the whole education system. I think this is, I was reading an article also, and it said that it's time to reconsider insult free education, and I really liked what was being said. Like insult free education is something that is interesting, because it doesn't really have to mean verbal insult or like physical. It really means, you know, putting a student in a setup where there are four walls and there's an examination paper and there's already stress. So you're like, ab jo hai, show me the best that you can do, you know.
Right.
Not taking the student outside, not allowing the student to interact with the environment, really just being like, this is what you've read and this is what you have to copy paste in an examination. I think that is insult to the intellect of a student, to the curiosity of a child's mind, the lack of conversation. So I think really this is a pivotal time, and all of us must, like for myself, I really have considered changing my learning patterns, you know. I haven't been able to read properly for the past 2 years because of the A-levels program that I was doing. It was physically painful to be in that like environment. And now that I have my time, I find myself reading and I find myself doing all these things. And I was like, oh, this is the person that I am. Like, this is who I am beyond my school. And there's so many times I wanted to go on a trip with you. You remember every time you put up a post, I'm like, I want to go. And then I'm like, shit, there's an exam. We have exams. We have all sorts of other things coming up. There's another.
Yeah, so I'm going to respond to this privilege thing
Yeah.
that has interrupted. So if you look, as we come into a new era, there will be growing pains. There'll be issues, economic issues, social issues, language issues, culture. All of that is reality, because now we're looking at a global idiom. So whether domestic staff gets it or not gets it at this moment, whether it's going to be in English or in Urdu, what the search engine like is separate, right? You're talking about policy and systems. So a systemic change first needs a conceptual framework. Once that conceptual framework is created, then you do a drill down and you figure out how it will dissipate amongst all the people that you want to get it to. The first thing you've identified, that it must dissipate. We must have this triangulation where it goes to the masses, right? Accepted. At least you have said no more privilege. And then you've said that having access to the information is a privilege that should also drill down to the masses. Understood. So this is how we start building the framework and answering Mars's million-dollar question also. That if we accept that all of this has to happen, and you just said it, that we need to get out of those boxes, we need to get out of the classes, we need to get the students to the heritage sites, right? For me, what Jean and I have been talking about, that the heritage site is the center point, like the representation of the human, and we have all of this world knowledge, the universe, astrology, geometry, and then all of what you said, environment, earth, and everything below. And that makes that single unit in this sort of two triangles, two kissing triangles kind of shape. Remember the Mohenjo-daro conversation at night before we went out? Guys kept me up till 1:30 in the morning. And I think if I hadn't like fallen over exhausted, we would have just continued. So think back to that. Think back to you know, do you want classes to be like that? And the
I
conversations that
do. I think that conversation,
I'll never forget.
right? And that conversation that we had, I think we all went out of it being like, we need a minute to just absorb like
Can you tell
all the
people?
knowledge that was
Tell
thrown at
people.
us.
Can you just introduce? Tell people what.
Okay, so we went to Mohenjo-daro, and I think we got there at night ish. We had our dinner, and then Sir Zain was like, "I have a few questions. I've made these placards. I want to do an activity." And we were like, "Itni der ho gayi hai, like what? Blah blah blah." We were being like whiny teenagers, and he was like, "No, no, come." So we got the manager's office. We're sitting there in a circle, and he gives us our placards that we have to talk about. And I think it started from that point at around 11:30, and it went up to 10, 11:30, and it went up to like 1, 2. And
Yes.
we spoke about everything. We spoke about the exchange of knowledge. We Sambara in, yeah, like Anushka said. We spoke about, I think, even Sambara in as a whole. I mean, Sir Zain kept telling us like Bhutto's relationship to it, and how like the heritage value and the disco valley pillars and everything. And we were like, we're in the middle, like we're slap in the middle of history. So
Yes.
what do we talk about? And we were like, we have Mohenjo-daro to look at, which is all the way like 4,000, 8,000 years ago. And then we have Sambara in and Bhutto and his grandeur and his lifestyle to look at. And I think it started from there, and it went on to be this great conversation about knowledge, about social media, its role. And all of us went out of it thinking कि मतलब कुछ establish हुआ है आज. We all felt the energy of an exchange. We all felt like we were feeding off of each other. We were completing each other's sentences. And I
Yes.
think that was the power of conversation in a classroom. I didn't feel like Sir Zain was Sir Zain. I felt like Sir Zain was like a buddy who we were having a conversation with. And along with all of our counselors and the teachers that were there also, the conversation was so equal. It was on such an like equitable ground that everybody felt like we belong here. Like nobody is a student, nobody is a teacher. And that's something we should definitely try and recreate in our classes. Because if we, it's not just for liberal arts students that you need this conversation. You need it for an economics student, you need it for mathematics. You need to make all these subjects like IB program. It needs to be conversation based. So yeah,
Yeah.
Mohenjo-daro was awesome.
Described a very interesting new thought in education, which again Jean and I have been discussing, which is um, participatory. So there's no longer a student or a teacher. There's no longer a fixed start to finish curriculum and syllabus, but you continue this sort of feeding off of one another's shared knowledge, experience, cultural background, and navigate gently, as you mentioned earlier, a new future, new balance into. So what we did that day was for me was an experiment in seeing how this would work. And you know, as you said, we broke down the barriers. I was no longer sitting on a pedestal up here as a teacher, which is very old school, right? The teachers like up there and you're down here. This whole, what you describe as the insult structure of education, where you just swallow it, you know. So that linear, old school linear Ustad Shagird type, I mean, Ustad Shagird type thing still works for craftsmen. But if we're trying to create what you again said, critical thinkers and analysts and people who can ask questions, then this maybe this
The
demo
dynamic.
participatory thing, right? So I was stuck with the same questions and the same difficulties you were at the same time in the same place. And we were sitting next to Mohenjo-daro, who, so you guys had all of this happen at night. And then the next day you show up at the cradle of civilization, which belongs to you, right? And we talked about ownership of heritage,
Ownership.
of this history, right? So take that model and now tell me, how do we go into the future? So like what you guys did, if you were to create a model for me on a digital platform, that I could put a student in Japan and in South America and in Reykjavik and in Sydney all into the same course, how would we do it? What do you suggest?
Huh. So I did this anthropology course with the University of Oxford, and it was online, the entire thing. It was like a 2-month course. and it was all online. It had videos, it had content, and then it had this platform where it was called the conversation platform, where so there were people who were like 60 and then I was like 19, and I could have a conversation with them. I would just put up what my opinion was and they'd reply to it, or then we'd start this conversation where we'd engage. And I didn't even know, like somewhere in Australia, somewhere in like Peru, this person is sitting and I'm here like in Karachi. So I think it's doable. I think we could do it in a manner where, because now like even going to these sites has become slightly problematic, because it's a group and you're going, there's too much you have to think about. I really think if we get together and create a platform where ownership and uh, realization and learning and unlearning are the premise of what we are going to talk about, then we most definitely, I think you of all people, like you're the best person to do this also, because you know you've had a conversation with a student, you know how they function, and you also know what history to expose them to that will allow them to further like go into um, it themselves. So I think the way we do it is just to create a platform where you unite all these students and just ask them to talk. Just give me your opinion about whatever you think: heritage, identity, architecture. What does it mean to you? And I think when we start on that individual basis, कि अब तुम बताओ what you think, because I think that's where we started off in Sambara in also,
Yeah.
where you asked us what we think. And that's when we were like, okay, this is an opportunity to either build your perspective or to shift it. When we
Yeah.
were given the opportunity of movement and shift, we
Yeah.
then acted.
Yeah.
So I think
Nice.
just the platform should be something like where you just ask students, just talk, just discuss, and great ideas and critical thinking will develop from that one point only, is what I think.
So if we're not able to take people to heritage sites, do you think one should create virtual tours? Sherbano has just said it is so doable. I did a course with UPenn on introduction to dental medicine online. That was amazing and so helpful. I'm sure it would be amazing. You know, our work is slightly different in that sense
Yeah.
that, you know, if I show you a picture of Mohenjo-daro
So, you know,
and take you there, it's a completely different experience when you're standing.
That's it, right? Like you gave us a presentation about Ranikote, about Makli, about Mohenjo-daro before we went. But
Yeah.
I think the grandeur of it, we couldn't quite grasp it till we were there, till we were like 5 hours into driving and we look at this like Great Wall of China type of structure out
Yeah.
of nowhere. And I think I was like, oh my God. And that like, you do that, like when you hold on to yourself and you're like, we did this is ours.
This is
वो जो
yours.
realization होती है ना location पर पहुंच के, and then just Sir Zain talking in the background and the silence and the community, I think all of that, you can't, there is no replacement. But there is this chance that you have to think about it, to talk about it in the four walls of your house, and then maybe explore it whenever you have the chance. But talk about it and do it on your own is something that is necessary for you to even after you go there. I mean, you will have these conversations, so might as well start them from home and then go there and expand it, because one has to take it in. One has to look at, I studied about Mohenjo-daro in grade 7, and when I saw it, I was like, why didn't they get us here? It's right around the corner, it's not that hard. And I think I would have respected it way more had I seen it while I was studying it. I would have respected my own history way more than I did had I had the opportunity to see it in flesh, to touch it, to feel the architecture, to feel the small houses, to feel the claustrophobic nature of that civilization, to feel how intertwined they were. These realizations only came when we were there and when it was visual. And also, given the fact that I'm a visual learner, So one has to also take into consideration the types of learning that you do. So I'm a visual learner. Most people are not like verbal and textual learners. So un bachon ke liye kya? You know? So I think this one has to go there. You can't just say ke if you create a digital, it's just like making a presentation. I don't think it would do justice to the place. Uh, but yes, conversation is something we can begin at home.
You know, interesting, Ekta. So there is, Maz, I agree with you. We're just going to come back to that question. There is, I want to also come back to what Hisham has said. Hisham is an old friend of mine based out of Shanghai. He's a very senior architect and a teacher at university there. But, you know, Ekta, so the other day, I'm going to come back to this idea of how do we do this. I have been asked by many people, like people who've not had the, again, privilege like you, to have a visionary like your head of Lyceum who said this should become a course. No other school has said, can this become a course in the school, right? I mean, there's plenty of fancy schools all over Karachi, all over Pakistan, but you're lucky that Ahmed said, I need this for my students, and put it into place. And Shahryar went crazy structuring the logistics and the security and whatnot, right? But we did it.
Right.
So the other day, now I've got people, thanks to Instagram, who are saying that we're not able to go on these tours with you. Can you create a virtual tour? So virtual tour, I did some research. How do I create that tactility? And this, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but there's something I realized just yesterday when I was looking at the different, I was looking at different people's videos of Petra, National Geographic, BBC, Random Person X, Random Person Y, in Chinese, in Japanese, in Hindi. And you know, I found that the ones that were the most emotional about their like visceral response to this space were the ones I connected to most, the ones that describe the texture, describe the color, instead of just giving me dry history. It'll never be the
Right.
same feeling the heat of the environment outside Larkana and walking on the earth and touching the brick. But it'll be better than the documentaries we have if we find a way of going up close details, showing scale. You know, I think if there's a way of creating an emotional response, because I feel like a lot of what you're describing and Anushka is talking about, others also, is there's a memory that's been left behind. You guys are not throwing back facts and figures at me that, wow, we were so amazed about how many bricks and how many. Just you're all talking about a holistic experience that for me is more emotional than anything else. So I think that if that emotional takeaway
Connect.
could
Right.
be that connect could be recreated through film, because look, books make people cry, films make people cry. If film and literature have had the ability to create emotional reaction, why can't we do that now? I mean, from Shakespeare to Fairs to, you know, go for all the way back to Shams and
I agree with you. You mentioned National Geographic right now, and I just got like a new. I just thought of it from a different perspective because you're right. I mean, nobody's ever seen like a black jaguar or like any of these things. But I feel like if you convey knowledge in the right manner, I think Pakistan में तो generally भी. I mean, I think you're the only person who's doing Edutours. I mean, I don't know of anybody else, right? You started it. You're the pioneer, and I think पाकिस्तान में हमारे पास हमने वो चीज की ही नहीं है लाइक हमारे पास वो हमने कभी history ko even if it's bad we've never tried to provide it like even if there are bad books being written we don't have accessibility to those books and nobody really goes and gets them so I think if there is a way to write it in a manner or to present it in a manner through film and movie. I mean, it doesn't matter then if it creates an emotional, if it has to create an emotional impact, right? I think even if we get the basic knowledge across and stem that idea of curiosity, वहीं से we can start and do wonders. I mean, ज़रूरी नहीं है कि आप हर चीज जाके देखो for you to have a relationship with it. Like you said, you read so many books. I mean, half of the religious history that we have, we've not gone to Middle East and we've not seen. Most people have not seen Safa, Marwa, or any of these things. I think the relationship that we have to it is it's been instilled into us. It's been conditioned into us. So if that can happen, then for sure we can have this platform where even if we're not creating an emotional impact for everybody, if we're just giving them a chance to be curious about it, I think that would be more than enough done on our part to just get information pushed out there, for starters, at least.
You're talking about a very powerful revolutionary language to bring heritage architecture and its value of ownership and identity into everybody's heart, like the control mechanisms of all religions worldwide. Let's not pick one of them,
Exactly.
right?
And
So
we
to
spoke about when
movement, I think if you connect that to quickly read, Ekta, scroll down to Hisham's message, connect this thought, hold that thought, and connect this to his question. He's saying that as with Mars, how does this innovative methodology, which is what you've just mentioned, this whole mass, like, how does this innovative methodology get adopted, right? So that's the question. How do you create this trigger and have people take it in? Or in the absence of government and institutional support, is this a way of complementing traditional methods? This is a fun question for you to answer entirely in English so that he understands the answer.
Okay.
Hisham
How
is
does innovative, let's start with the first part, how we adopt innovative methodology. Um, Interesting question. Um, I think so. There's steps to adopting it also, to adopting change, to adopting yourself to change, adapting yourself to change and innovation. I think first is recognition that change ab aa raha hai, to recognize that change. The second step would probably be um, acting upon it, and that if it's not it has to be a group of people, if not individually, if not a single individual, or if not yourself individually, it has to be a group of people coming together and making a model, talking to students, adopting student-based learning, because it exists. I mean, I've applied to colleges in the US, and my whole premise of applying there was that I want to be responsible for what I'm learning, for the courses I'm taking. I
correct.
want to be hand in hand with my counselor, with my teacher, with whoever I am talking to. So I think models to exist karte hain, application ka time aa gaya hai. And even if we don't apply it across the board at this point, if we start from one point and create the policy makers that we need to create to get the wheels of this machine running,
Yeah.
I think we can do it for sure. So adopting it would first be, if I bring it down to just 2-3 words, it'd be recognition, um, creating a group which has these conversations, which makes it a point to think critically, and then application, for sure.
And you
And then
think
the second part of this question was that if there's no government, I mean, let's be honest, I mean, हमें साफ पानी नहीं मिलता, हम लोग टैंकर मंगवाते हैं, हमें गैस नहीं मिलती, तो आई मीन एजुकेशन में गवर्नमेंट का या किसी इंस्टीट्यूशन का सपोर्ट मुश्किल ही है कि हमें अच्छी तरह से लाइक होलिस्टिकली मिल
can
जाए.
you speak English, please? Hisham doesn't understand Urdu.
Oh, sorry. So we don't
Question.
have clean water.
Yeah.
So we don't have clean water or electricity or gas. So I just really think that the government, I mean, most of our budget goes into military expenses. So I think really getting the government to do it would be problematic as is. So I mean, it really has to be, somebody needs to realize their individual corporate social responsibility and then be like, this is my job, this is what I'm passionate about, and I need to, it has to come from a revolutionary idea and from a person who's willing to give it all, and then move forward from there.
And create a team. You said it needs to be a community of
Create a
people
team,
that
for
come
sure.
together. And for instance, though, that group of people that you said, that cluster, of like-minded thoughts, who are partly philosophers, partly educators, partly historians, partly technologists, innovators and inventors, I think would, if I'm right, would be the kind of family profile that you're saying would be responsible, should be individually socially responsible for creating this machine, right? And then we figure out how to roll it out. Is that right?
Right. And I think we need to have people from all areas, from different perspectives, from all from a minority, from a majority, because I think most times, I mean, why do I have a problem with history? Because it's from a man's perspective, you know. Every
Yeah.
time I read it, I'm like, would this have been slightly different had somebody else written it? Had it been a woman who was writing it? Had it been somebody from a marginalized community who was writing it? So I think it needs to be inclusive in a way where everybody, any loophole that we can find, there is a person there who is aware of this community, who is aware of the environment, their own personalized environment, to comment on it. I can't say कि मतलब this XYZ. I can't. A majority cannot comment or structure what should be done to a marginalized community, right? In the same way, we need people from all areas, from all professions, to really get together and be like, we're changing the face of education, and this really can be our national identity at this point, because we have nothing to rely on, we have nothing that's original. And I think if we start from education, we really can build something larger than life that's original and that's our own, that's a Pakistani model. And the sound of that is so amazing that it is something that we create.
It
So I
is
think for sure.
is amazing, and it's nationalistic, but it's amazing. But I also think it's regional centric, which is what Hisham said yesterday in a comment he posted on the inventors that I posted on Instagram, that, you know, we need to look at something coming out of this region, out of the Asian region. So I'm going to wind up this conversation because our time is almost up, Ekta, but can I leave you with homework to all of this stuff talked about? I have to leave you with homework. I mean, what kind of a teacher would I be if I didn't leave you?
Yeah, that's like a
You know,
normal at this point.
showered me with all these compliments. Now I'm going to get back to you with homework. So
Okay.
try to create. The point is, let's continue this conversation offline. Create a
Okay.
flowchart or a mind map of how you think, who the players are, who you want to include in this inclusivity, who the intersectional players would be, the stakeholders, the role of the government. Just create like bubble diagrams in a flowchart, and then let's revisit this and have this conversation again. Okay?
Perfect.
Great.
Okay.
Thanks a million for your
Thank
time.
you so much.
It is so beautiful to hear you say all these fantastic things as usual. I really missed out on these conversations. I miss out all of you guys. We have to do these tours again. Hisham, Maz, thanks for your questions. Anushka, great to see you. Thank you everybody else who's joined us today. Saira from New York and Tanya from Dhaka. Thank you so much, Ekta, once again. Take care of yourself.
Bye,
Set
sir.
flow charts whenever you're ready. Cool.
Okay.
Thank you. Thanks a million. Take care. Bye. Khudafis.